Adria Velasquez read the words 3 times, but they didn't change. Termination notice, effective immediately. The cold, unfeeling font hovered on her holoscreen, bright against the dim blue light of her apartment. Each syllable felt like a punch, methodical and impersonal. She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of her desk as if the right amount of pressure could ground her. 10 years. 10 years of emergency shifts, of saving lives in the high-tech halls of Solara Prime Medical Complex, of navigating the bureaucratic nightmare of interstellar healthcare. And now it was over. Her throat was dry as she skimmed the automated message. Corporate restructuring. Increased efficiency through AI-assisted medical automation. All human medical personnel deemed redundant. ***. Redundant. Adria exhaled through her nose, forcing herself to breathe evenly. She should have seen this coming. It started with the small things, diagnostic algorithms replacing triage nurses, robotic surgeons boasting a zero-mistake margin. Last month, the board had praised the hospital's record-breaking efficiency scores. Record-breaking. She should have known then. A sharp pang shot through her chest, and she realized she was gripping the desk too tightly. No severance. No referrals. Credentials revoked. ***, they hadn't even given her a chance to fight for her position. A single blink dismissed the message from the screen, but the words remained burned into her mind. Her apartment, small, sterile, and more a necessity than a home, suddenly felt suffocating. The rent was due in 7 days. Her savings? Barely enough to cover 2 months. The job market? Saturated with humans in the same sinking boat, all victims of the same corporate efficiency. Her wrist pad vibrated. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was another automated message, but the insistent rhythm wasn't a notification she recognized. When she glanced at the screen, a single line of text glowed against the dark interface. Emergency medical beacon detected. Non-human entity. Her pulse quickened. Emergency beacons were routed through official channels, hospitals, planetary responders. Not personal devices. A glitch? Or had her credentials, though revoked, left a lingering connection? Then she saw the location. Coordinates. Uncharted asteroid, Sector 4, Zeta. She frowned. That wasn't standard travel space. It wasn't even a recognized mining sector. Just dead rock floating beyond Auriga and Nine's orbital lanes. Adria hesitated, glancing at her medical bag, the same one she always kept packed for sudden calls. Old instincts warred with new uncertainty. This wasn't her job anymore. And yet, her hands moved before she made the decision, grabbing her medkit, throwing on her jacket, and stepping into the docking bay where her aging shuttle sat like a rusting relic. The moment she keyed in the coordinates, she knew there was no turning back. The asteroid was lifeless and black, its surface jagged where ancient impact had scarred the stone. No settlements, no signs of civilization, only the faint hum of her ship's landing thrusters breaking the silence. Adria adjusted her gloves, stepping cautiously onto the uneven terrain. The emergency beacon pulsed through her wrist pad, leading her forward, each step crunching against the brittle surface. Then she saw it, a figure sprawled across the rock. At first, her brain struggled to comprehend what she was looking at. The being was massive, its dark form blending into the asteroid's surface. But when she drew closer, moonlight caught the sheen of scales, black as onyx, sharp as obsidian. Wings, torn and limp. A body that might have been majestic if not for the injuries marring it. Deep gashes, plasma burns seared across its hide. And eyes, golden, flickering in the darkness, focused on her with eerie intelligence. Adria stopped breathing. A dragon. Not the crude myths from old Earth, but something undeniably real, undeniably alien. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the safety of her shuttle. But she didn't. Instead, she took a slow step forward, hands raised in careful, open-palm submission. The dragon's chest rose and fell in uneven, shuddering breaths. When it spoke, its voice was low and rough, scraping against the silence like stone against metal. You came. Her pulse slammed into overdrive. The translation implant in her skull caught the words, adjusting for syntax, but the sheer impossibility of understanding the creature sent a jolt through her nerves. You sent the beacon, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. A slow blink. Yes. Audrey swallowed hard. A thinking being, not an animal, not a monster, asterisk asterisk. She knelt, flicking open her scanner. It took every ounce of willpower not to tremble as she ran the device over its massive form. Severe plasma burns, deep tissue trauma, bone fractures, internal bleeding, asterisk asterisk. You're in bad shape, she murmured. I can help, but you need to let me. The dragon let out a sound, half a sigh, half a growl, before closing its golden eyes. I am in your hands. The words settled deep in her bones. Audrey set her jaw and reached for her medkit. She worked quickly, methodically, letting experience take over. The wounds were unlike anything she had treated before. The scales resisted traditional dermal regenerators, and the internal structure was a delicate balance of cartilage and reinforced bone. But the patterns of trauma, the way blood clotted, the way pain registered in the creature's breathing, all of it followed the fundamentals of medicine. She could do this. Hours passed. She stitched torn flesh, sealed burns with specialized polymer gel, adjusted splints where fractures ran deep. The dragon remained still, watching her with those piercing golden eyes. When she finally leaned back, exhausted but satisfied, she exhaled. You'll live. A low rumble, something between a purr and a sigh. You are kind. Audrey huffed a tired laugh. Not kind, just a medic. A pause. Then softer, no kind. She met its gaze, unsure how to respond. The dragon shifted slightly, muscles trembling with the effort. You have done more than you know. She frowned. What do you mean? But the dragon only closed its eyes. Exhaustion pressed down on her, the weight of the night catching up. She could ask later. Right now, all that mattered was that she had saved a life. Tomorrow would bring its own questions. For now, she watched over the dragon as it slept, unaware that her entire world had already changed. The dragon stirred before Audrey did. A shift in the air, the faint scrape of claws against stone, sent a whisper of tension through her muscles. She kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, listening. The rhythmic rise and fall of slow, controlled breathing told her that, despite everything, he had survived the night. She sat up, her limbs aching from the cold surface of the asteroid, and found those golden eyes already watching her. You are still here, the dragon murmured. His voice was stronger than before, though rough, like embers struggling to catch flame. Audrey flexed her fingers, shaking the stiffness from them. Of course I'm still here. I don't abandon my patients. He regarded her for a long moment before exhaling, the sound carrying something unreadable. Most would have fled. She shrugged. Most don't get emergency distress signals from dragons. Speaking of which, why me? His gaze flickered with something she couldn't name. Because you would come. That wasn't an answer. Or maybe it was in some cryptic, frustrating way. But she didn't press. She was too tired for riddles, and besides, the fact remained that he had been right. She gestured toward him, scanning his body with her practiced eye. The swelling along his limbs had gone down, though the fractures would take longer to heal. The plasma burns had sealed, leaving glossy patches along his dark scales. He was healing, faster than she would have expected. How do you feel? She asked. He tested his wings, stretching them slowly, though the movement was strained. Like I fell from orbit. Audrey snorted. You're lucky you didn't. That impact would have left a crater. Something that could have been amusement flickered across his features, then faded. He shifted, attempting to rise, but his limbs trembled under his own weight. Audrey instinctively stepped forward, but he stilled her with a glance. I'm not weak, he said, though there was no arrogance in it, only quiet determination. She crossed her arms. You almost died. Let your body catch up before you start playing warrior. The dragon stilled again, as if measuring her words against some unseen scale. Then, without argument, he lowered himself back onto his haunches, tension slipping from his frame. Adria raised a brow. That easy. He huffed, a short, warm breath that rustled the edge of her jacket. I do not disregard wise counsel. She chose not to respond to that, unsure if she wanted to acknowledge the strange respect in his tone. Instead, she reached in her medkit, pulling out a nutrient patch. You're probably starving, she said, offering it. This isn't much, but it'll keep your body from eating itself while you recover. He looked at the small, rectangular patch with mild curiosity, but did not take it. That is not how I feed. She frowned. Then how? The answer came before she finished asking. The air around them stirred, charged with something unseen, and for a brief moment, the space shimmered, like heat waves distorting the horizon. It pulsed around him, the very essence of the asteroid itself bending toward him in an invisible tide. The dragon inhaled, and the energy moved, drawn into him like a deep, slow breath. Adria felt it, a faint pull at the edge of her consciousness, something brushing against her nerves before vanishing into the vast well of his being. She took a step back, her own breath unsteady. That wasn't oxygen. No, his voice was softer now, almost contemplative. It is life, not as you understand it, but close. She stared at him, at the way his wounds looked just the slightest bit smoother, his posture a shade stronger than it had been seconds before. He absorbs energy, not food, not water, but something deeper, more fundamental. It should have terrified her. Instead, it fascinated her. Her mind spun with questions, theories, the implications of such a biological function. But the dragon tensed. The shift was subtle, but Adria felt it before she saw it. His golden eyes sharpened, head tilting slightly, nostrils flaring as if scenting something on the wind. What is it? She asked, pulse quickening. He didn't answer immediately. Then, in a voice quieter than before, he said, We are no longer alone. Adria's stomach dropped. She followed his gaze toward the horizon, where the black expanse of space stretched endlessly, empty and silent. But it wasn't empty, was it? Not anymore. A glint of silver, the distant flicker of movement. Ships. Not just any ships. Asterisk hunters. Asterisk sleek, predatory, designed for speed and capture. They moved without the flashing beacons of commercial vessels, their approach silent, controlled. Her breath hitched. Are they looking for you? The dragon's jaw tightened. Yes. Adria had faced danger before. She had patched up soldiers, heard stories of border skirmishes, and intercepted distress calls from ships that had been too slow, too unarmed, too unlucky. But she had never been in it. Never felt the electric charge of looming catastrophe, so close, so real. What do we do? She asked, forcing her voice to stay steady. The dragon's gaze flickered to her, something unreadable moving behind those golden eyes. Then, for the first time since she had met him, he bowed his head, not in defeat, but in something far more deliberate. You saved my life, he murmured. Now I will save yours. Adria barely had time to react before the air around them shifted. The same pulse of energy from before, but stronger, deeper, as if reality itself was bending around him. And then the world vanished. The universe collapsed around Adria in a rush of light and silence. One moment, she was standing on the barren asteroid, the ships closing in like steel vultures. The next, the ground vanished beneath her feet, the weight of existence pulling away as though she had been cut loose from reality itself. Her body seized, her mind screaming against the impossible sensation of movement without motion, of being nowhere and everywhere all at once. And then, solid ground. She gasped, lungs dragging in air that felt different. Heavier, richer. The dim cold of the asteroid was gone, replaced by a golden warmth that settled over her skin like sunlight through thick glass. She staggered forward, catching herself against something smooth and solid. It took her brain a moment to register the shift, but when she did, her breath hitched. She was no longer in space. Marble stretched beneath her fingertips, veined with silver and faintly thrumming with some unseen energy. Massive pillars rose into an arched ceiling, so high it felt like standing beneath an artificial sky. The air shimmered with soft, floating embers of golden light, drifting lazily before dissolving into nothing. It wasn't just a structure. It was alive. The dragon stood beside her, his dark form a stark contrast against the luminous surroundings. He, too, took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as though shaking off something heavy. His wounds, though still present, looked less severe. Audria's heart pounded. "Where are we?" He turned to her, the golden glow catching along the edges of his scales. "Home." The word carried weight, not just in its meaning, but in the way he said it, as though it had been a long time since he'd last spoken it. Audria swallowed, her brain scrambling to make sense of it. "You teleported us?" "Not precisely." He exhaled, his wings shifting at his sides. "I folded space, bent it to my will, momentarily aligning two distant points until we stepped through the threshold." She blinked at him. "That's significantly worse." A soft rumble, something dangerously close to amusement. Audria took another breath, grounding herself. "Think. Process. Asterisk, asterisk. So, you brought me to your world?" "Not my world." He turned his gaze toward the grand hall stretching before them. "My refuge." She followed his line of sight. At the far end of the massive chamber, a series of intricate doors loomed, etched with swirling patterns that pulsed faintly, as though sensing their presence. Beyond them, she could make out the faintest hints of something vast. Rolling landscapes, distant mountains, a sky that burned with hues she had never seen before. A sanctuary hidden between the folds of space. But before she could ask anything else, the air shifted again. A deep thrum echoed through the hall, and the doors at the far end opened. Figures emerged, tall, draped in flowing silks that shimmered with iridescent colors. Their movements were fluid, unnaturally graceful, their eyes glowing like molten gold. They weren't dragons, but they weren't entirely human either. Audria felt a slow wave of unease coil in her stomach. These beings radiated something ancient, something powerful. One of them stepped forward, their gaze locking onto the dragon. When they spoke, their voice carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "You return at last." The dragon bowed his head slightly, not submission, but acknowledgement. "I was delayed." The figure's gaze flickered to Audria, a moment of silent scrutiny. "And you bring an outsider." The dragon shifted, positioning himself slightly between her and the others. "She saved my life." The words settled like a stone dropped into still water. The figures exchanged unreadable glances before the first one spoke again. "Then she will be judged accordingly." Audria tensed. "Judge?" The figure turned their luminous eyes to her, and in that moment, she felt it. Asterisk, asterisk, something asterisk, asterisk brushing against her mind, like fingers ghosting over the surface of her thoughts. Not invasive, but testing. Measuring. Her breath caught. "I don't like being poked at." The faintest hint of a smile. "Then let us hope you are more than you appear." Without another word, they turned and strode back through the massive doors, the others following in their wake. The dragon exhaled slowly. "Come." Audria hesitated. "Should I be worried?" He looked at her, and though his expression was unreadable, his voice was quiet. "Yes." She clenched her jaw. "Fantastic." Still, she followed him through the doors. The moment they stepped through, the world beyond unfolded. It was breathtaking, a sprawling expanse of floating islands, waterfalls that cascaded into nothingness before vanishing into mist, great bridges of shimmering light that connected each suspended landmass. Above it all, the sky burned with shifting hues, deep indigo swirling into molten gold, streaks of emerald and violet tracing the heavens like veins of fire. Audria exhaled slowly. "This place is impossible. Only to those who have not seen." His voice held something she couldn't quite place. Nostalgia? Grief? But there was no time to dwell. The figures led them across a bridge that didn't seem entirely solid beneath her feet, toward a grand structure perched at the highest point of the floating islands. Its towering spires twisted like molten glass, its surfaces shifting in color as though reflecting an unseen sun. The further they walked, the more she felt it. Asterisk, asterisk, a presence. Asterisk, asterisk, something old. Something aware. It wasn't just the people here that held power. Something far greater lay at the heart of this place. And as they ascended the final steps, as the massive doors of the structure opened to welcome them into its depths, Audrey realized something with bone-deep certainty. She was standing on the precipice of something far larger than herself, and there was no turning back. The hall pulsed with a quiet, living energy. The ceiling arched so high it disappeared into the golden glow above, and the walls, if they could even be called that, seemed fluid, shifting between physical structure and open sky. Audrey had never seen anything like it. It wasn't just a room. It was a presence. At the far end, seated on what appeared to be a throne woven from threads of light, was a being unlike the others. Their form was humanoid, but only just tall, elongated, their skin the color of deep space, reflecting constellations that flickered and shifted across their body. Their eyes burned like twin stars, holding knowledge that spanned millennia. Audrey swallowed hard. Okay, no pressure. Asterisk, asterisk. The dragon beside her lowered his head slightly. Not a bow, not submission, just acknowledgement. The others who had led them here moved to the sides, standing in silent formation. The being's gaze drifted between them before settling on Audrey. You are not meant to be here, they said, their voice resonating through the chamber, not loud, but vast, as if spoken by the universe itself. Audrey clenched her hands to keep them from trembling. Yeah, well, neither was he, but I wasn't about to let him die. A silence stretched, heavy but unreadable. The dragon remained still, but she could feel him, his quiet presence beside her, solid as the ground beneath her feet. You interfered in a matter beyond your understanding. The being continued, unblinking. Do you comprehend the consequences of what you have done? Audrey let out a slow breath. I understand that I did what was right. A ripple of energy passed through the chamber, something shifting in the air around her. She had no idea if that was a good sign. The being tilted their head slightly, their eyes narrowing just the slightest fraction. And if what was right led to war, to destruction beyond what you can comprehend. Audrey didn't flinch. Then maybe the problem isn't me saving someone's life. Maybe the problem is a system that sees compassion as a threat. Another silence. This one longer. Then, impossibly, the being's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. You are bold for a mortal. Audrey exhaled. I'm tired for a mortal. A quiet rumble, soft but unmistakable. It took her a second to realize that it had come from the dragon beside her. He was laughing. The being's gaze flickered to him. You are different as well. He met their eyes without hesitation. I am what you made me. The air shifted. There was something more here, something deeper than Audrey understood. But before she could ask, the being rose from their throne, stepping forward with slow, deliberate movements. The others would see her removed. They said, speaking to the dragon now, she is an anomaly in a fragile balance. She is a healer, he replied, and she has already proven more honorable than most. Another beat of silence. Then, the being extended a hand toward Audrey. She fought the instinct to step back, a brush against her thoughts. Not an invasion, not an attack, just a presence. Then suddenly she saw flashes of a war long forgotten, a betrayal that shattered worlds, a dragon cast out, hunted by those who once called him kin. And beyond that, asterisk, asterisk, a choice. Asterisk, asterisk, a moment where fate had been rewritten because one stubborn human had refused to look away. The visions faded, leaving her breathless. The being studied her for a long moment before finally stepping back. The four will not be pleased, they murmured. The dragon's voice was steady. They never are. A pause. Then, with a flick of their wrist, the being turned, their form dissolving into a swirl of cosmic light. The chamber dimmed, the tension easing. Audrey released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The dragon shifted beside her. That went better than expected. She shot him a look. That was better. A slow, deliberate nod. We are still breathing. She groaned. You owe me so many explanations. His golden eyes gleamed. Then let us leave before they change their minds. And with that, he turned, leading her toward the doors. As they stepped out into the vast, impossible landscape once more, Audrey felt something deep in her bones. This wasn't over. Not even close.